BBC Radio York.
Now, it's been another momentous week on North Yorkshire's fracking front line. Instead of lorries taking equipment onto the site at Kirby Misperton, they've been brought off. Third Energy says it's going to be used elsewhere, while it continues to wait for the government to decide if it can go ahead and frack. The Business Secretary, Greg Clark, has now asked for a full financial check on the company. BBC Radio York's Mike Kemp has been to Kirby Misperton to find out more.
I think today we can celebrate a little victory. Yeah. Okay. And thank you for coming.
A cold, biting wind couldn't dampen the spirits of the protesters who this week have seen lorry after lorry remove fracking equipment from Third Energy's well site, which less than 5 months ago had been brought in. They could even dance outside the gates as police and security guards looked on.
The whole kid's house, in, out, you shake it all about. You do the okey dokey and you turn around. That's what it's all about.
Soon after, another 3 lorries, one carrying a huge reel of black tubing, rolled out of the entrance, with police officers walking along either side and police vehicles driving in front and behind this convoy, as protesters, muffled up against the cold, waved goodbye.
I don't understand why all the police are here, because no one's going to jump on a lorry that's leaving. I know.
Oh yes, we want to see these gone. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. We want to see those gone and never come back again.
I was here when that equipment came in, and I saw the trauma it caused to the community, the raw emotion, crying, genuine upset. So to see it leaving today, I think for today we can call it a victory. I'm really happy to see it leave, and I don't want to see it go anywhere else. I think we need an all-out ban on fracking in England, and I hope it starts at Kirby Misperton.
We've got to celebrate every little victory, and this is a victory.
It feels like the closest we've got to a victory at the moment. It feels like it's worth celebrating.
Third Energy, which had predicted it would be fracking by Christmas, says it's being practical and the equipment will come back when it has all the remaining permissions to frack. Alan Lynn is its Chief Operating Officer.
What we've said is, if we take the kit off site now and we rest it for a while, whilst it goes and does other work, and we make sure we've done a thorough process with the government, then we can plan it all coming back on. And because we'll have all of our permissions in place and we're ready to go, when it comes back on, we can get straight onto the project, we can complete it quickly, and we can get everything off. So it's the best way to minimise the disruption for the local community.
A pallet is cut up to keep a fire burning on the wide, muddy verge. Protesters are obviously delighted at this turn of events, but won't be leaving any time soon.
I feel like the tide is turning slightly, but I think it's so important everyone still keeps coming, no matter what.
So BBC Radio York's Mike Kemp there this morning. So after months of protests and disruption at the proposed fracking site in Kirby Misperton, will fracking ever happen here in North Yorkshire? Lorries have been taking equipment back off the site because Third Energy says they're having to wait a lot longer than expected for the final government go-ahead. Well, joining me in the studio this morning is Conservative MP for Thirsk and Malton, Keven Hollinrake. His patch covers the proposed fracking site. Morning, Mr Hollinrake.
Morning, Judy.
So why is the government taking so long to make this decision?
Well, I think Mike had it right in his piece then. He talks about exploring the potential for shale gas in the region, in this country, and we currently import 45% of our gas supplies. That will increase to 70% by 2030. So we need gas, despite our investment in renewables. But we need to see if there is any potential for shale gas to fill that gap. Now, I've always said that I'm cautiously in favour of that, as long as it's done in a way that protects the landscape and the environment. And what the Secretary of State, Greg Clark, who's the Energy Secretary, is doing is making sure this application does meet those two objectives, protecting the landscape and protecting the environment.
Can you see from the outside, though, it does look like the government's having second thoughts about fracking. Not so long ago, it was pushing local councils to make quicker decisions on fracking applications, but now the plans have stalled, and Third Energy Energy have been expecting to frack before Christmas. It does look like it's reining back and having second thoughts, doesn't it?
Well, I think it's right to be cautious. I think most people I speak to want us to be cautious, not a dash for gas like they saw in the US. They want to make sure these applications are fit for purpose, that it properly protects the environment. Most people I speak to do want to see those things, so I think people should welcome the fact that we're taking a very cautious approach to this.
Now, the government's asked for this financial check on Third Energy, and it missed the deadline last year to submit its accounts, didn't it, Third Energy? And this was unexpected even for Third Energy. So has the collapse of Carillion played any part in this?
I have no idea whether that's a consideration, but one of the main considerations is the company has this financial resilience, because it's not just about doing the work properly, and clearly that's really, really important, but it's also the aftermath. When this is all finished, any remediation, any site restoration, you've got to make sure that the producers are fit and proper and have the financial wherewithal to make sure that they do this work responsibly and look after the environment before, during and afterwards. So it's quite right, therefore, that we make sure the financial resilience is in place for these companies.
But why so long? This is what we can't get our heads around. Why? Because it wasn't anticipated to take this long. People were expecting Third Energy were expecting to get cracking before Christmas.
Well, it's a good point. I've spoken to Greg Clark a number of occasions about this, but he is very keen to make sure this is done right. There was a slight legal change that needed doing, because this well had actually been drilled prior to the Infrastructure Act in 2015, so we need to make sure the legal position was correct. But I think the Energy Secretary also wants to make sure that the environmental protections are in place, and I believe also the landscape protections are in place, so people's worst fears aren't realised. People are talking about a landscape full of well pads. That's not how it will be. The well pad at Kirby Misperton has been there for 30 years. So this has no visual impact on the countryside once this fracking has been done. So we've got to make sure that is the case, and the beauty of Rydale, that Rydale stays as beautiful tomorrow and in the future as it does today.
There's a lot of environmental movement, isn't it? There's so much in the news about plastic and things like that. Is the tide turning against things like fracking? There's little appetite for it from the public, and that's from the government's own surveys. There's this growth in solar and wind power and other alternative energy technologies. Do you think fracking's had its day before it even started? We heard one of the protesters there saying the tide's turning.
Well, gas definitely hasn't had its day yet, although it'll be interesting to see how many decades gas is part of the mix. But this isn't gas or renewables. This is coal or gas. Renewables are absolutely part of the future, but can't deliver all the solutions today. They'll make about 20% of our energy needs by 2020. So that's 80% of our energy needs are not catered for. We're phasing out coal by 2025, which has been lauded around the world in terms of that decision. But we also need to use the cleanest fossil fuel, which is gas. So I say we import a lot now. We'll be importing a lot more in the future. So the choice is, do we produce it ourselves or do we import it? That's the choice. It's not gas or renewables. It's gas or coal.
Just briefly before you go, Mr. Hollinrake, the police have spent more than £600,000 policing these protests, and now equipment's being taken off again. Is that a waste of police money and also more disruption for the community?
Well, the police are only there because we've got the protesters there, of course, and I absolutely support the right of peaceful protest, but it hasn't all been peaceful, so I understand why we need a police presence. My point that I've made to the policing minister and the police and crime commissioner is we should be finding national funds to pay for at least some of this policing, rather than all being on local taxpayers. So I've got a meeting with the policing minister next week to discuss that very point.
Are you confident?
I'm going to put every bit of pressure I can on the policing minister and the government to make so that I think they do accept this as a national context to it. So therefore, it's only fair that we get some national funds to pay for some of this policing work.
Keven Hollinrake, Conservative MP for Thirsk and Moulton, thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you very much.